Welcome to The Lens. The Lens is a podcast in partnership. So I'm really delighted that we're episode of our podcast. Ndidi Okezie OBE. This is Ndidi's first executive community. So it is so lovely. Yeah.
Really well. It's lovely to meet you as well.
Welcome to The Lens with me, Sarah Travers. The Lens is a business in the community podcast in partnership with One Young World. So a slightly different episode today. I'm really delighted that we're bringing you a very special episode of our podcast with Ndidi Okezie OBE. Now, this is Ndidi's first month as the new Chief Executive of Business in the Community. So it is so lovely to meet you, Ndidi. How are you?
Really well, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to meet you as well.
Yeah, so I feel really privileged to be able to speak to Ndidi so early on the job. And in this episode, we're going to find out just exactly who our new CEO is, what Ndidi has achieved so far in her career, and where her passion lies in taking business in the community and all of our members forward on this very important, responsible business journey. So, indeed, normally, I'm sure you know that on the Lens, we usually have two guests. So, we're going to give a big shout out before we start to our partners for this podcast, One Young World. However, we are bringing this special episode to our listeners today as you have literally just taken up the role as CEO for business in the community. And I think all the staff and members are a little bit curious as to what direction you feel you'll be taking this organization in the coming weeks, months, and years. And I know that you're in the honeymoon period right now. How's it going so far?
It's definitely honeymooning. So I am really just overwhelmed by the reception, the warmth, the generosity from BITC staff, particularly, but the kind of extended community across this network. I'm loving it. And as I said, yes, I'm very conscious. It's probably the honeymoon period, but I'm really grateful. It's been absolutely wonderful.
So, what have you been doing so far? Tell us about your career to date.
Interesting question. I left university and I really wanted a city job. I kind of grew up thinking being in the city was what success was, right? I'm a huge reader, and I used to read all these books that kind of showed a kind of a life of a working corporate girl, and I left university and I actually got a job in publishing for the Hearst Media Group. And very quickly, I actually realized that I didn't find as much joy in this as one I'd thought, but more importantly, as everybody else around me did. And so it really was the first time that I realized that being fulfilled at work was an important but quite unique thing. And I actually really envied everybody around me because they you could see them just really enjoying the work, and I didn't. It didn't fuel me. And so in that time period, I literally stumbled across an advert for Teach First. And it was the first year of Teach First. It would be the inaugural cohort. And what just really struck me was almost as if it was reading my mind. It was this idea of like, yes, do work, but do work that makes a difference to more than you. From the time I saw the advert, 3 weeks later, I packed up my bags, completely changed the trajectory of my life, and moved to Canterbury for summer residential.
For those who don't know about Teach First, what is Teach
Yes.
First?
So Teach First, particularly back then, it was a leadership program, but it was trying to address educational inequality. So its theory of change was, let's get quote unquote the best and the brightest graduates, and let's lure them away from the city and lure them away from the big four and all these kind of careers that everyone thought you were meant to do, and let's make the case for them working in the most disadvantaged, most challenging schools, because education is a game changer. And so if we can give young people challenging circumstances, um, an amazing education, you give them more keys to kind of walk through life with. All you had to do was to commit to 2 years. And in that time, you would do a leadership development program, but you would also get straight into the classroom and start teaching. And so I actually remember thinking, this cause is so important. I can do 2 years. I couldn't think of anything worse than being a teacher. To me, that was a nightmare, but the cause was so important that I thought, "Yeah, woman, like, you can sacrifice 2 years." Lo and behold, 2 years turned into 10 years. I absolutely fell in love with teaching, but you would never have convinced me that that would be the case. And so the opportunity to kind of have a bridge into something that didn't felt like you were committing completely opened up this whole new life to me, and, things kind of went on from there.
So totally purpose driven and finding out what energized you. And that was making a difference, giving people a leg up. And that really sowed the seeds for you then.
Yeah, 100%. It completely changed the trajectory of my life. I didn't realize there were careers like that. I didn't realize that, work that was about going after a big system problem was something you could do. And that really sowed the seeds for me around this idea of systems change work. And so after 10 years in the classroom, became a school leader, and then I went to work for Teach First directly. And the reason I went to work for Teach First is because I'd been in a school that had gone from the bottom of the grading to outstanding in 4 years. And the difference maker was the leader. So she came in and she was so unapologetic about the standards we all needed to have for these young people that I watched what that did. And so for me, I was like, well, hold on. If one school can do it, what does it take for a local area and a region and a nation to do it? And so this idea of like how you scale what works was also something that I think was embedded in me quite early on.
That's so impressive. And actually, just seeing the results of having the right leader. So again, sowing the seeds for bringing you to where you are now. But you also went to UK Youth as well, where you became chief executive, and big things happened there too.
So after Teach First, I really wanted to go work for business, which is, I think, very apt for this role. I had heard so much about business. You work in partnership with business, you know the role business plays, but I'd always been on the other side of the equation. Just wanted to go understand what secret did business know that the rest of us didn't. And so I actually went to work for Pearson after that. And it was such an important step for me because, first of all, I realized there is no silver bullet. Business doesn't know anything no one else does. Everyone is figuring it out. Everybody can get value from other sectors and from each other. And so I knew I wasn't going to be there that long because, I really wanted to get back to this kind of mission driven work. And then I stumbled across an advert for UK Youth, and nobody could quite understand what I was doing because, when you compared what I was doing at Pearson to UK Youth in terms of turnover, size of team, size of remit, it just didn't make sense. It felt like a step backwards, but it definitely wasn't that for me. I was really drawn to the idea of, again, just understanding another part of the jigsaw. Each sector is like a piece of the jigsaw. And so if you are trying to affect systems change, the more you can understand the pieces, I think the more humility you come to the problem with, but also the more ability you have to really step back and see what the ultimate picture is. And UK Youth was an interesting organization that I think, 100 years old. So that legacy piece was definitely there. But my sense was that we could play much bigger. I think at the time it was around £6 million turnover. It was quite an insular focused work, the youth sector. And I was coming from education, I was coming from corporate. For me, it was about young people. I felt that youth work had so much value to offer other sectors. But in order to do that, we needed to have a seat at the table. You have to have a much more, like a bolder mandate to be able to build a larger tent for others to come underneath. And so, in that 5 years, we went from 6 million to just over 20 million. We grew our membership base. But most importantly for me, I think we made a strong case for the youth sector to have a seat at the table when it came to discussing what's right for young people. And that only happened through coalition building. And that's definitely something I come to this role with equal passion for.
For the last 5 years, you've also worked as a board advisor to Sky, steering its £30 million commitment to strengthening representation and inclusion. You also serve as a non executive director and chair People and Nominations Committee at the South Bank Centre. So you're definitely about making sure that everyone has a seat at the table. I forgot to ask, where do you come from and what was growing up like for you?
So I was born in Nigeria, and I came here as a very little baby. So I haven't known anything other than the UK. And I was raised in Southeast London. I am a Southwark Bermondsey girl. Um, Grew up single mother, very diverse community. I'm a Christian. Faith is a huge part of my life. It was a huge part of growing up, where I spent most weekends serving in the church, working in the church. And yeah, that's kind of me. I think I am a South Londoner to my core.
Why business in the community then, whenever you saw that advert, or how did that come about?
I don't know if this happens to you, but life makes so much sense in reverse. And so you look back and you think, "Oh, okay, yeah, that meant this and that led to that." And so I had spent 5 years at UK Youth and I actually left with a real kind of mission. I wanted to understand money better. You spend so much time in the charity sector chasing money, chasing grants. And actually, what ends up happening is that you're competing with others who have equally important missions and, do good work. And, you're kind of crabs in a barrel almost, like really like fighting to say why you over others. And I left with a real sense that we need to grow the pot. We're all kind of fighting over what still feels like quite a small um, uh, slice of investment. And yet, Sarah, I would like look out and I kept on seeing all these huge funds of money being raised, whether in the VC world or in this, and we've raised £100 million, we've had 60 million, 100 million, 120. And I kept on thinking, what are they raising money for? Like, what is all of this? And how are they so easily raising money? And I realized I didn't understand that world enough, but it felt like there was something to learn from that side of it. So I left with a clear mandate that without an agenda, without me trying to get something from them, I just wanted to understand different types of money, whether that's VC, PE, business, cold business, whatever you want to call it, high net worth individuals. I obviously have skill sets. I wanted to be of support and service to them, but it was really about trying to understand their world. And Sarah, in that year, there were probably 3 occasions where I would be at a dinner or something that was a small group, very high net worth individuals, CEOs of corporate firms, but it was a social issue that they were discussing. And on at least on 3 occasions, people started ideating and brainstorming on solutions for their communities. And I found myself saying, "Oh, no, 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 don't do that. That's business in the community. What you're describing is business in the community." And either they hadn't heard of business in the community. And so I was like, how have you not heard of business in the community? You're a corporate leader. Or they didn't realize that was what business in the community did. And so the third occasion this happened, I actually reached out to people that I knew business in the community. And I was like, guys, just just to let you know, there's a lot of chatter of people trying to, I think, recreate the wheel and reinvent the wheel. Like, don't let them do that. Like, guys, go and make sure business and community is involved in these conversations. And next thing I knew, a headhunter called me, and I hadn't realized that they were in the middle of recruiting for a new CEO. So I didn't know anything about it, and that kind of started that journey. But for me, there are 2 things that I think are incredibly true and core to who I am that explain why this role is literally the dream role for me. One, I'm not really a sector purist, right? Like in everywhere that I've been, people really care about education, the role of education, the role of the youth sector, the role of corporates, the role of government policy. Although I've sat in all those spaces, I've almost always sat in them with an eye to what others are doing that we could learn from, right? And so, because I really think systemic problems cannot be solved by any one sector, they need a coalition of support. I don't think there are many organizations that, like BITC, sit really purely in the messy middle. Like the job of BITC is a bridge. It is not to advocate for one sector over another. It's very much about the problem we're all trying to solve and how you mobilize people to understand the role that they can play. And that whole kind of convening, mobilizing piece is so, I think, central to the mandate BITC has. And that, I think, is honestly who I am to my core. So it feels incredibly authentic, incredibly timely, and just the kind of work that I think truly, truly fuels me. You're understanding that business is a force for good, that you're connecting business to the front line, community insights, policy insights, and together we're all figuring out what is it that we can be doing to make this problem better.
So it's a unique set of skills that you have there. You've talked about convening, coalition, collaboration. You're obviously very aware of what's happening in the periphery. But now you're a leader, now you're the boss. So you've got to have a vision. And going forward, let's just think about how you want to drive this organization forward. Are you at that stage where you can reveal what you're planning to do? Or are you still in that soaking it all up, still in that listening phase?
Sincerely, I'm 2 weeks in, and I was saying to the staff and to the senior team that you can't go through an appointment process at this level without having a straw man, right? Of course, like, people part of the process is they're asking you, what is it you see? What do you envisage we should be doing? And so I've kind of arrived with a straw man. But sincerely, this period is all about reconciling what I thought from the external view with a real credible understanding from an internal view. And I can't do that without talking to our staff, our members, our stakeholders more broadly. So I've said and I keep saying I am in listen and learn mode, and I am reconciling what I think with what the reality is. I think the things that stay true regardless is BITC has an unmatched legacy. I just think you cannot the past 40 years of what BITC has been, has meant, has done. One of the central questions for us, I think, now is how do we retain relevancy for the future? Right? What does that look like? What is our role in this new era, in this new world? And how do we make sure that we continue to be a real source of value? But also, I think it's fair to say I'm not just interested in how we tell the story of the current state. I think we want to be leading, we want to be helping people um, envisage and see what's ahead and what's coming, and have a point of view around that. I don't think it serves anyone for us to be vanilla or kind of on the shelf. I think we can be bold and decisive and have a point of view. So that those are the things that I think remain true. I think the key question for us will be, where are we placing our bets? I think we need to make some real strategic choices and double down on things. Like crudely, I'd say so what, but like it's the I'm not satiated by activity, right? Like if we really believe there are problems to solve, we can't pat ourselves on the back because we did something nice. The question is, have we moved the dial? Like, what is the outcome for the work that we've done? Have we made a difference? And I think that has to be our bar. And for that to be the case, you need to put a stake in the ground. What are we going after? What do we want to move the dial on? And then we go on the journey of trying to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, you've already identified before coming into the role that there are gaps there, that there are people who've never even heard of the organization. So, retaining that relevancy or even just demonstrating that relevancy at a time when people are wondering, there's a lot of big challenges out there facing organizations and businesses today. So, you can't rest on your laurels. There's a big piece of work to do. You talked about the world at the minute. It is ever changing. It's evolving. Huge challenges, especially when you're aligning them to what business in the community stands for out there. There's a lot of people that are pushing back on that. What's your view at how the world is changing, and how do we, what impact is the current geopolitical situation having on businesses in the UK at the minute?
Yeah, it's such an important question, isn't it? Because and already the insight that I think staff have given me is that one of the major shifts is the work that I think BITC has been known for and, obviously excels in. So many businesses are bringing that work in-house now. Right? They have the sustainability directors, they have teams that think about this stuff. And so the question about our value add and our offer I think is in really an important and yes, of course, in this kind of context, some of the things that were quote unquote hot at the time in terms of everyone thinking about them, tides have shifted. We obviously in the UK are not as I think affected as some a place like the US, but we've got organizations that are global that have to rethink how they speak about certain things. And it's a discussion that people can have different views on. I may have different views about the extent to which you need to, rename something to just still be able to do that work, or whether you double down and hold the name, whether you hold on to race and DEI, or whether that's a distraction. Let's just call it something else so we can get on with it. There's some really credible arguments on either side of that. Life is a cycle, right? And one of the things that I would caution organizations against is that customers, consumers have long memories. And I think that there is something about the organizations that double down in this period that I think they will be remembered for doing so, right? However, there were some real immediate pains, and a business leader said to me, very compellingly, they're like, "What's more important, the name or the work?" And I just, I thought, well, you can't really argue with that, right? Like, these are all names we've given things. If we change the name, but we're still committed to delivering on those things, I don't know. There's lots of arguments on either side. But again, I think one of the things that I think we can do as BITC is create the space for the conversation, create the space for leaders to articulate what can feel slightly awkward, uncomfortable, unsure. We should be in the space where you can do that. You can have really robust conversations and know that you are safe in, everyone is trying to get to the same outcome. So, yes, of course, the macro geopolitical forces are bearing forth on what we not only what we do, but how we do it. But I also feel really bullish that there is a role for an organization like BITC in this moment, and organizations need, support, but in a maybe in a slightly different framing, if that makes sense. That those are the things that I 2 weeks in are kind of circulated in my brain.
You've talked to staff about the three V's: visibility, validation, and value. They're important to you.
Yeah, as I said, my straw man is again this question of like relevancy. I don't think you can be relevant if people don't know you exist. And so there's something about how do we make this work visible? I actually think that's less about BITC and more about the work. So how do we make the work much more visible? There is so much happening here, Sarah. It's just mind-boggling and incredible things that unless you were in the room, you just wouldn't know. You wouldn't know happened. You wouldn't understand. I've heard people talk so effusively about the impact that a BITC experience, program, engagement, support has had on them. And again, I think we can do more to capture those things and tell those stories in more dynamic ways. So yes, visible is incredibly key. And then going back to this value proposition, of course, we have to be valuable. We have to be something that they think is an absolute no-brainer, and they're clamoring to be part of the coalition that's being built. And then the other thing that I can see externally is that, we have the ability to really demonstrate what works. So that's the validated piece. How do we know all our place-based work, all our kind of leadership work, all our campaigning work? How do we codify what is working so that others can see and understand? And then how do we articulate what fuel is needed to scale that? And so if the work needs to be visible, the work needs to be valuable, and the work needs to be validated, proven. Those for me feel like straw men that whatever we end up doing remain true.
I know with many of the guests that we have on the lens, they often talk about the Game Changer being the King Seeing is Believing program. That's just one of those things that until somebody has actually participated in that, um, they've never really fully understood what it meant to be a business and the community member. And then everything changes from that moment. Have you been on any of the trips yet, or have you got one booked?
My first one's on Wednesday, so I'm very
Oh,
excited. Peter's actually hosting it, who I know he just did his episode of The Lens, so it was great to listen.
it was
Thank you for
super.
that. Thank you for the insights into my chair. That's awesome. But yeah, he's hosting, so I'm going to my first one on Wednesday. I've heard so much about the impact of these visits, and so that's definitely something I want to learn a lot about in terms of that question of how do we pour fuel on something that's working? How do we scale it? So yeah, that's coming up for me.
Well, indeed, I just love your energy, and I think you're going to bring a whole new vibe to business in the community. And I really hope that we record all of your energy and that it is visible to so many people and lots of people who perhaps don't realize the importance of business in the community. But I'd love to ask you a question, two questions actually, that I ask every guest on this podcast. First of all, if you could encourage our listeners to read one piece of research or one report or book or whatever that has inspired you to be more responsible, what would it be? So we'll start with that one.
Well, I think it's probably only fair for me to cite a BITC report. Cheating maybe, but it just came out, so I think it's very relevant. We just released a responsible business in an AI world report. So I would encourage people to check that out. That's obviously incredibly topical and something that I'm actually very passionate about in terms of AI and understanding the opportunities that could come from that, but also how you do that responsibly. So, of course, I would say so, but I found it incredibly insightful and interesting. And so, the stats that are there, the insights from other senior leaders in terms of what their challenges is. One of the things that really stood out for me was this concern that we're creating a two-tier workforce because you've got younger people really jumping into AI and leaning in and testing and learning and playing around. And, maybe the older generation being much more reticent. And although you can understand that, what it's ended up and they're concerned about is that you end up having this two-tier workforce. And so we've had some internal conversations about how we can create almost like a gamification kind of environment around it, just to encourage people to play. And obviously we're doing it in a way that everything's locked down and we have incredible security at our organization. And so I think giving people the confidence to play in a safe environment feels really important. So please read it. I definitely think it's something we can't afford to put our heads in the sand around. AI is here. So we should be part of shaping how it scales.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Secondly, the other question that I always put to the guests is all around you as a responsible leader. So, what are you personally committed to doing more of or less of in the coming very busy year?
Oh, good question. I think I obviously I'm talking about this particular period, whether you call it first 100 days or whatever, and being very much in listening mode. I'm very committed to continuing that. Like I don't suddenly stop listening once 100 days are done. So I think the ability to listen is important. But I think maybe the shadow of that, which is maybe how I'd answer the second half of your question, is it's already come up for us. And I think people need permission to make hard choices about what to stop, right? Like it's there's that's already come up internally. We do, for us as an organization, and many organizations will feel this, we do so much good work, but actually we don't have the bandwidth to keep doing it all at the same level, at the same depth. And I think there's something about leadership that means that you give people permission to lay down sacred cows, to have and make real strategic choices. I always love the saying that strategy is actually more about what you don't do than what you do. And so there's something I think that is a responsibility in that. It's responsible to say no and to help your organization say no more often. So I am actually really bad at that because I love doing things as well. I love being responsive. If there's a need that comes up and you think you can play a role, you're like, come on, we can do it. but I'm really committed to staying the course, making choices, and then keeping us within scope on those choices that we've made.
Mm. And indeed, I would love if you come back in a year's time and we could then reflect on the first year. But I wish you all the very best for your new role. It's wonderful to have you in charge and good luck with what lies ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Just an invitation to everyone listening to this. Reach out, connect. You can find me on LinkedIn. Reach out to BITC. Let us know how we can help. I'm doing a listening tour for our members and other businesses and community groups. And so if you kind of orbit the space that we work in and you've got some thoughts about what we could be doing, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
Oh, you're welcome, Ndidi. Ndidi Okezie there, the new Chief Executive Officer of Business in the Community, talking to us after her first 2 weeks in post. You've been listening to this special edition of The Lens with me, Sarah Travers. And if your business would like to understand how